Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about the best books that I read in the year of 2023. The top 10 is going to be science fiction, fantasy type books, but then I do have a couple of honorable mentions that I'll also add in from other genres. I do also want to say, a few days ago, I will have posted a video where I do a book battle, book bracket type thing to work out the best book of the year. There is some overlap between these two lists, but there are some new books on this list too, just because some months I read a lot of really great books and other months really aren't pulling their weight. But anyway, let's talk about those non-fantasy ones that I wanted to highlight. Firstly, we have Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. So this is like a romance story between two neurodivergent individuals. It's more of a story about their own individual struggles and just how their relationship fits into that. And even though it's not really a genre that I would normally enjoy, I did particularly like this one. I thought it was written quite creatively and I liked a lot of the concepts that it pulled in. Then as well we have a couple of YA mystery thrillers. So I really liked One of Us Is Back by Karen M. McManus and also Nine Liars by Maureen Johnson. Teen thrillers aren't always what I like, but I like the mysteries in these and I like how all the pieces come together in such a satisfying way. I also like that for these characters, the main characters are really nice, genuine, likable people, whereas in so many adult thrillers, that is not the case. Anyway, let's get into talking about science fiction and fantasy. We're going to start with a sci-fi. So we have Genesis by Bernard Beckett. Bernard Beckett is a New Zealand author, and you'll see there is a few New Zealand authors at the bottom of this list. I'm a bit sad that they didn't make it further up, but still happy to have them on the list. So in this story, we are following this character who is going into their final exams, where they basically have to do this big oral exam and they are asked questions about their topic of choice. And through the questions, we're learning both about their topic of choice, which is this historical event, and we're learning about them. And they do eventually come together in a surprising way. So the historical event is basically, this is in a post-apocalyptic type world where New Zealand has decided to wall themselves off from the rest of the world. And there's like this defensive barrier. Not realistic. We could definitely never afford that. And then the main character of this story, or the main historical figure in this story, is this man who was supposed to be defending the coastline, didn't follow the rules, and then ended up in kind of this experimental situation. There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And while I do wish that there had been a little bit more plot to the story, I think the concepts were really interesting. And once you've read it, you will never look at this cover the same ever again. Then we have Into the Sounds by Lee Murray. So this is a book series also set in New Zealand. And this book in particular is the second book in the series. I will say I didn't think the second book was quite as good as the first book, but it still does like a really great job of incorporating Maori mythology into this like military creature horror story. And honestly, military creature horror is not something I thought I would like until I read this series, and now maybe I think I need more. Or at least maybe some creature horror. So basically each one of the books in this series follows a group of both military people and civilians, often some scientists, who end up in some remote area in New Zealand and come across some kind of creature. Usually there's also a bunch of criminals there causing problems. So in this particular book, we're down in Fiordland, Milford Sounds area, where it's absolutely beautiful, but it's like very remote. There's kind of one couple that we particularly follow, a woman who works for the Department of Conservation who has gone to this area to find out about some rare wildlife. And we're also following her boyfriend, who's this amazing action hero guy. I still would really love to see these books made into like an action movie. I think they could be amazing. There is also this Maori mythology element that's brought into it, and another scary creature, although I think the creature played less of a part in this book than the creature in the first book, but it still was pretty terrifying. And again, it's one where the situation kind of escalates. There's some parts where Lee Murray describes some kind of horrific injury happening to someone, and it's so cringeworthy. I love it. So even though the series wasn't perfect, I just had such a great time with it, and it's so different from a lot of other books that I've read. Then we have the last New Zealand author on this list. So we have Sanctuary by A.C. Buchanan. This is a story set in Wellington, just in this flat of a bunch of neurodivergent flatmates. As well though, in this flat, they have a bunch of ghosts, and they've kind of set themselves up as a sanctuary for ghosts, and sometimes people will bring ghosts to their flat for them to take care of. And they really loved the way that the story drew parallels between the needs of neurodivergent people and the needs of ghosts. We do also have this ghost who is causing a lot of troubles, and the story does kind of escalate in terms of where that goes, but it's also very slow and very cozy, and I think it's just a book that would be a great read for a lot of people in terms of either feeling really seen in terms of their neurodivergent needs, but also really good for other people, more neurotypicals, to build some understanding. So I would love to see more people reading this one. Then we have A Storm of Sisters by Michelle Harrison. So this is actually the 4th book in the Pinch of Magic series, where we're following the Widdershins sisters. So these 3 young sisters. I think the older one is like her older teens, and the younger one is kind of not quite in her teens, and their family has kind of a witchy heritage, and they have these magical artifacts that allow them to do just a few little magical things. And each book is very witchy in feel. In this one in particular, the 3 sisters go with their crotchety grandma to go and look after her cousin who has hurt herself in this place where it's really snowy, and there's this like winter festival going on. There's also a bit of a mystery in this town where there's a myth about this crystal ball that was stolen one time in the past, and it seems like maybe the thief is still around. So I think these stories are just such endearing stories, so wholesome. The sisters, I just love their relationship and how genuinely sisterly it feels. They don't always get along, but they also are always there for each other. And also I think these stories are often really clever. This one in particular, just the way that all the pieces are laid in place, and then the way the story kind of comes together at the end, are also kind of genuinely scary at some points. This is a middle grade book, and I do think it's still appropriate for middle grade readers, but some bits get a little bit scary. Maybe I'm just a wuss. Then we have A Sleight of Shadows by Kat Howard. This is the sequel to An Unkindness of Magicians. This is in a world where magicians are very underground and secret, and there are different houses that regularly have this battle against each other to see which house will be the leader of the magical world. I think an element I especially love about this world is the houses themselves. Like the physical house has a consciousness and is there trying to support the family that lives in it, and there's usually a bond between the house and the leader of the house. So in the first book in this series, we had this young girl named Sydney coming in, trying to really change the power structures in this world, because although a lot of people don't think about it, there is always a cost to magic in this world, and the weakest, most vulnerable are being made to pay that cost. So things were done in the first book that really changed the whole way the world worked. And what I really loved about the sequel is that it shows that change isn't necessarily easy. It's not just a one-time thing and then the change will continue. It really showed how hard it can be to keep working at keeping those changes in place. As well, Sydney did have to make some quite big sacrifices in the first book, and we're dealing with the consequences of that. And there's just a few characters still around making some very bad decisions. I really love the way that the magic works in this world, and I think we got a little bit more of the darkness of the world, but I think overall it was those themes that I really liked. And I don't know if we're ever going to get more in this world, but I would love to. Then we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson, which was the 3rd Secret Project book. I will say I also really loved Tress and the Emerald Sea, which was the 1st Secret Project book, and both of these could probably be on the list, probably should be on the list. Both of these stories are set in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, and we have, unfortunately, in my opinion, this character Hoyd, who is a character from the Cosmere, and to be honest, I think he ruined both these books. Both books would have been better without him. But in both these books, Brandon Sanderson has created a really unique magic system. In Tress, we have these spores of different colors that can be activated in different ways and cause different crazy things, and Tress is just going on a quest to try and save the love of her life, even though she was quite happy staying at home, just living her life, but sometimes you got to save the one you love. So I really love Tress, just the way that it was written in such a whimsical way. I think Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, though, other than Hoyd, was the one that felt the most similar to Brandon Sanderson's like Mistborn books or his earlier Cosmere books. So in this one we have a world where nightmares can take form, and they have these painters who paint in order to stop these nightmares. And our main character, Painter, also forms kind of this psychic link with this other young girl in a different world who is kind of a religious figure in her world and uses rock stacking to talk to the spirits in order to get them to help people. And throughout their story they work together to solve each other's problems. And in typical Brandon Sanderson style, it all comes together in a really clever way. So I didn't really like the other two Secret Project books by Brandon Sanderson, but it was all worth it for these two. Then we have The House of Many Ways by Diana Wynne Jones. This is the third book in the Howl's Moving Castle series. I did find out my brother, who really likes the Howl's Moving Castle movie, didn't even know this was based on a book, and definitely didn't know that there was a series. I will say I do think the second book in the series feels a little bit different, or feels similar but doesn't quite have the same lovable characters. But the first and third books I felt had a very similar feel in terms of the characters, maybe because in House of Moving Castle we have Sophie kind of going out into the world to seek her fortune, and then in House of Many Ways we're following this young girl named Charmaine who's been really sheltered her whole life and doesn't have a lot of life skills. Her mother has really just focused on her being respectable, but then her auntie arranges for her to go and house sit for this distant uncle who is also a wizard, and she's very out of her depth, but I really liked following along with her journey, learning about the magic, which is so whimsical and beautifully described. So in this wizard's house, initially appears that there's only 2 rooms, but depending on how you go through the door, you can end up in all sorts of other rooms and other places. She also gets involved with this mystery that's going on with the castle, and we do eventually get a bit of a cameo from the characters in the previous 2 books. I really just thought this was such a wholesome book, and so whimsical and so funny, but also like just came together in such a satisfying way. I really thought the plot was quite clever, and I just definitely recommend it. Oh, but you'll need to read Howl's Moving Castle first. Okay, then we're into my top 3. I should say the ordering of this list could definitely change on a different day. But for now, we've got Assassin of Reality by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. So this is the sequel to Vita Nostra, where we follow this young girl who goes on holiday with her mother at this beach and meets this man who starts giving her these strange tasks to complete. Eventually, these tasks lead her to attending the Institute of Special Technologies, which is this very strange school. When they first turn up, they see the second year students all have like these weird physical deformities, and then the lessons that they're being given are very abstract and nonsensical. But the way that the story builds upon itself, it's always strange, but it manages to go like completely into nonsensical things, but still somehow makes sense. I really loved the concepts that the story explores. I will admit, the second book was not quite as good as the first one, but it still was really interesting. And even though there was a romance that I felt like took away the focus from where I would have liked it to be, I think the way it explored the concepts was amazing. And there's still definitely concepts and lines from this book that will stick with me for a long time. Then for number 2, I've just grouped together everything I've read in the First Law World by Joe Abercrombie. So I've read the first trilogy, and then I also read the first 2 standalones in this world. So this is a grimdark series following just a bunch of different characters around these different empires that are at war. There's also kind of like a bigger magical war where these magical people are interfering with the events going on in these empires and basically trying to use them as tools. But I just love the way that Joe Abercrombie writes characters. I love the way he takes them on a journey that never quite leads them where you would expect them to go. He also writes some really horrific and dark things in a very humorous way without taking away from the seriousness of some of the topics. And sometimes he has just some really amazing lines that I really love. So if you haven't picked up this series, I definitely recommend it, even though I'm only about halfway through so far. But I'll be continuing in 2024. Then, number 1, I will say, in my other battle, where I battled the best books of the month up against each other till I came up with the best book of the year, things came out in the opposite order. So that could definitely be an option here. So at number 1, I'm going to put the Kate Daniels Wilmington Years duology. So far it was just 2 books or 2 little novellas. So to have novellas in the top spot here, very impressive. But also, admittedly, the Kate Daniels series is one of my most favorite fantasy series. We're following this mercenary called Kate Daniels in this world where magic has started to come back, but magic comes back in waves. So sometimes magic works and sometimes magic doesn't. And just like magic coming back in the world has caused a lot of very like apocalyptic type events. And so it's very post-apocalyptic. So the Wilmington Years novellas are set after the main series of 10 books, and also I think after the spin-off series that we haven't yet had completed. But I think the authors, it's a husband and wife writing duo, I think they just wanted to be back with Kate and Karen after the whole COVID nonsense, our very own apocalypse. So basically in these books, Kate and Karen have moved away. They're just kind of trying to retire and raise their son, but events happen that pull them back into saving people and getting involved in these magical mysteries. I really enjoyed the mythologies that were brought into both these novellas, even though I've said before I can't really talk about what they are because it would be spoilers. A lot of these stories are just Kate problem solving and working out what's really going on and which mythology is relevant, but the way it deals with the problem solving and the mythology and the magic is so logical, and I just find the whole thing very satisfying. I love reading from more mature characters, and I really enjoyed being back with Kate Daniels. So those were my top books that I read in 2023. Let me know if you've read any of them because I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments below, or let me know what some of the best books you read in 2023 were. Also subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.